As you know, 4.5 months ago, the greatest battle in the history of our young nation was fought here in the fields around Gettysburg. Over 3,500 of our brave Union dead are here buried in the cemetery around us. We are gathered today on the occasion of the dedication of that cemetery. I wish to thank Dr. Edward Everett, former president of Harvard University, for so beautifully expressing the solemnity of this occasion over the past 2 hours. I am sure it's something none of us will forget. We're also honored to have with us today President Abraham Lincoln. He's been asked to give a few appropriate remarks. Mr. President.
Well, what I'd like to do, oftentimes women don't have the opportunity to speak publicly back here in the 1860s, but I'd like to have Mrs. Lincoln say a few things before I give my remarks.
Mr. Lincoln's a tad taller than I am. I appreciate your indulgence for allowing me to address all of you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, good. You know, folks aren't real aware that when we entered Washington City, there weren't very many troops in the city. The war hadn't been declared yet, of course, and when the fighting began, there were about 2,000 troops in the city, and we were all very frightened. Most of the Northerners fled, and that left behind Southerners, because Washington was primarily a Southern city. Now, Mr. Lincoln wanted me to take the boys and leave town with the Northerners, but I wasn't going to go if he didn't go, so we stayed behind. And the threats poured in. Even before we left Springfield, Mr. Lincoln was getting death threats. It was very frightening to hear all these things that people were saying about my husband. And without very many troops in the city, we were all very frightened. Now, you may know that there was a gunslinger from Kansas that got elected senator. He became Senator Lane, and he went up to Willard's Hotel and gathered a bunch of men with guns and brought them to the executive mansion to guard the president. I was so grateful for that. This group eventually became known as the Frontier Guard. And one of your own from here in Ohio, you probably all heard of the fighting Cooks. Well, Daniel Cook was one of those men that was over there at Willard's. And he was in the executive mansion then, helping to guard the president. Eventually, the troops came. And eventually, the city itself became quite fortified. I don't say bad things about people, but that General McClellan, there just hasn't been much fight in that man at all. But he has been really good about defensive strategies. So one of the first things he did was to put forts all around Washington City. And my husband had him step down, and when he came back as commander of the Army of the Potomac, he insisted that the president have a cavalry guard to accompany him when he was traveling. You see, in the summer, Washington City was quite foul. It was hot and it smelled, and by now there's thousands and thousands of troops in the city. So we would go out to the soldiers' home and stay. It's about 3 miles from the executive mansion up on a little hill, so we'd get a nice breeze. And every morning the president would ride in from the soldiers' home, and then at night he would come back out, often by himself. And one day, that, is it Corporal Cutter? Private Cutter? I don't remember, my memory's not so good anymore. Private Cutter was telling me that Mr. Lincoln came flying in on his horse really fast without his hat on. And Private went out and found it, and it had a bullet hole in it. And then, oh my, I was so afeared for my husband's safety. And the threats continued to come in. Now, there's a reason I'm telling you this. When General Lee entered into the state of Pennsylvania, we, of course, all became alarmed. And what was it, the second day of the battle in that town of Gettysburg? Mr. Lincoln was supposed to take his carriage into the White House, and instead he went early and went on horseback. So I was in his carriage that morning, riding into the White House. And at some point, the driver's seat went that way. And when the driver's seat fell off, the horses got spooked, and they took off running. And I knew I was in danger, so I jumped off the carriage. And I rolled down a hill, and I hit my head on a rock. And it was good that we were very close to a hospital. And the soldiers saw me, and they took me into the hospital, and they bandaged me up. And they thought I was okay at first. I felt fine, but then pretty soon the old infection set in, and I guess I was in a pretty bad way for a while. Mr. Lincoln even called our son Robert home from Harvard, where he's a student, and I was in bed for about 3 weeks. I eventually went into the White Mountains to recover and spent quite a bit of time even after that at the soldiers' home, because it just was very hard on me. Partially because I knew those rebels were trying to kill my husband, and if they didn't want to kill him, they were going to kidnap him. And they had all these plans for things they were going to do, and I was so frightened for his safety. I just worried myself sick every day. I just need Mr. Lincoln to make sure he's taking care of himself. And I do miss that General McClellan for that reason, because General McClellan's the one that made sure we were protected in that way.
He's in your spot here, so the chair doesn't move. These newfangled chairs with wheels. I'm sure about that. Okay, get you situated there. I am very pleased to be with you here again. Some things have happened between the time I was here recently. I'd like to go back a little bit and talk about the beginning of the war. And yeah, I did receive some death threats, some death pictures when I was at Springfield. And unfortunately, Mary saw some of them, and some of my children saw some of them too, but I was not worried about that. So I was elected president. The problem is, when you're elected president in the 1860s, you don't get to become president until 4 months later. I understand it's a little different now, but 4 months later. So in between the time that I was elected president and became president, I am tall president, states were seceding from the Union. And South Carolina was the first. They always seemed to want to secede for some reason or another, but I didn't think they would actually do it. Well, my very first day of being president, I ended up getting an envelope, and in that envelope, Major Anderson sent me some information from a place called Fort Sumter. It's a small fort out in the harbor at Charleston, and in this letter he says that our men are going to be running out of food in 5 or 6 weeks. What shall we do? Well, I do need to tell you that that's not something I was anticipating going to happen on my very first day of being president. But I talked to my captain, I talked to the generals, and the consensus was what we're going to do is just let them have it. Let them have Fort Sumter. We'll take Fort Pickens, which is down in Florida, and they won't be able to bother us down there. But I thought that was not good. That's not a good way to begin a presidency. And so I wrote a letter and sent it to the governor of South Carolina, and I told him that I am going to be sending ships down there with provisions. I'm going to be sending ships with food for our men down there. And if there is no harm done, no harm will be given. Well, he let Jefferson Davis know about that, their so-called president of the Confederacy, and Jefferson Davis sent a telegraph back and told his General Beauregard that they should attack. They should attack Fort Sumter. And so at 3:30 in the morning, a boat was rowed out to Fort Sumter, and a gentleman got off and he says, "Sir, by the authority of Brigadier General Beauregard, I have the honor to notify you that we will open fire with cannons upon Fort Sumter within 1 hour from this time. Your very obedient servant," and he left. Well, straight to his word, they actually did do that, and Fort Sumter lasted for about 33, 34 hours. But they were completely surrounded, and so there was the surrender. Many of us thought that the war was going to be a very quick war. There were young men that were worried that they wouldn't have the chance to go out and fight because the war was going to be over before they could get in there and have some fun. One large battle, and we would win. And when we won, the war would be over. And I understand the so-called Confederates thought it would come down to one big battle with them, with us, and they would win and the war would be over. But that's not the case. What we needed to do is bring the South back into the Union. The area that had seceded was about the size of Western Europe, so you're talking about France and Spain and Germany and large areas. We had to control that and bring them back. The folks down south, all they had to do was not lose. All they had to do was basically continue fighting until we got tired of the war and would quit. Confederates, if they didn't lose, they would win. Well, this is in the fall of 1863. We have had great successes out in the West. We pretty much seem to control the Mississippi River, the Tennessee River, the Cumberland River. We are slicing the South into a segment, but unfortunately, where most of the politicians live, where most of the press ends up being, that's in the East. And the folks in the East generally get their information from newspapers. The newspapers were saying that we were not necessarily doing so well. Let's see, I'm trying to think how many generals I went through in the Eastern field. I think I maybe even have to go to an extra hand here as far as the generals that kind of came and went. It seemed like those Confederates in the Eastern Theater were unstoppable. Well, I had given General Hooker command of the Army, and I just didn't feel like he was doing what was necessary, so I decided it's time to get another general, and I brought in a fellow from Pennsylvania, General Meade. And within 3 or 4 days, we started out the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, I had folks say, well, dear Lord, Mr. President, didn't you know you're going to have a fight? Well, no, I didn't. I thought we were just chasing General Lee for the time. Like this morning, I woke up to, do you think it's going to snow today? Well, probably so, because of what the weather has been doing here. But I replaced him, and General Meade ended up taking over. And what ended up happening was the Battle of Gettysburg. It was the largest battle in North America. There were 3 hot and torturous days in which you ended up having close to 150,000 men fighting and struggling. I believe the outcome of that war would change the fate of our nation. If we would have lost, if the Army of the Potomac that was being generaled by General Meade was defeated, Lee could go to Philadelphia, Lee could go to Baltimore, Lee could actually come to Washington, and we did not have enough troops to stop him. But thank God we did have success, we did have a victory. But unfortunately that victory did come at a terrible price. Many, many men were killed. Many were wounded, many were missing. The small town of Gettysburg only has like 2,500 people. You have 150,000 people coming to fight and thousands of people dying. They needed to make a very quick burial. Oftentimes very, very shallow graves, sometimes in mass graves. Unfortunately, because the graves were shallow, pigs and dogs were digging the area up, vultures were flying overhead, and it was becoming very evident that something needed to be done to actually give these men a proper burial. And so it was decided that we would develop something called the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg. Look, yeah, I'm throwing my hat. A plot of land next to Evergreen Cemetery was bought, and the men were going to be buried there. And it was on November 19, 1863. As was spoken before, Edward Everett was the speaker. He was the best orator in the nation. He spoke for 2 hours. Now, I'm glad to see you folks are sitting down, but Edward Everett had folks standing, and it wasn't a standing ovation. They just had to stand for 2 hours and listen to him. Now, I hear people saying, well, goodness, that must have been rather boring. Well, that was what was expected. That was what was expected of him, and I think we covered about every battle there was in ancient times all the way through, but I was asked to give a few appropriate remarks. And ordinarily I do not leave Washington except to maybe go visit the troops, but I decided that this was important. My idea for the speech had been in my mind for years. I did not write my address while riding on a train on the back of an envelope. Now, I need to tell you, if you've ever ridden on a train and tried to read anything that you have said there, things wouldn't necessarily make much sense. It was not a sudden burst of genius. For years I had these thoughts, and I had bits and pieces of the thoughts, and I would get them, and I would take my hat, which is my desk, and I would take out a pencil, and I would write it on on the paper on the top of my hat, and I'd stick it up inside my hat, and then when I got back to wherever I was going, I would put those bits and pieces away in cubby holes, and I could actually pull out some fairly good speeches in a short amount of time because I had been speaking about that. About half the speech was done in the executive mansion, and I finished the rest of it up in Gettysburg itself. I went to Gettysburg because I was very concerned there was war weariness. We had been fighting for 2 years. The South had to not lose. We had to control the Confederacy. I was hoping that my address would explain what the war was about and why we needed to continue. If you're familiar with democracies, we were a democracy, we were a republic, but also a democracy. And back in the 1860s, you could count the number of democracies on the fingers of one hand. Democracy was not very common. There were kings and queens and princes and potentates that would just be pleased to see our experiment with democracy fail. It was my hope that the Battle of Gettysburg would change the war, and that possibly my address would change the meaning also. I almost didn't go to Gettysburg, though. As Mary was saying, I think there was an assassination plot on me on the second day of the battle, July 2nd, but I wasn't in the carriage. Very seldom do driver's seats actually fall off, and without the horses being controlled by anyone, away they went. She did fall. She hit her head. She ended up having infections, and we were quite concerned. I asked for my son Robert to come, and then he was kind of slow, and I sent him another telegram. Why don't you come? Well, that was in the summer. The speech was in November. But our son, Tad, was sick also around that time. And we lost one child. Our boy Willie had died in February of 2000. In 1862, I apologize for that. I believe that was a slip of my mind. I do need to tell you that I am 205 years old, so I oh well, I should try that one again. Our boy Ted was sick, and Mary was frantic. She did not want me to go to Gettysburg because she was afraid that he may end up becoming more sick and possibly dying. But I had to go. It was necessary. Now, I do need to let you folks know that I've written my speech. Now, if you're amongst those folks that some teacher made you memorize that, I apologize for that because, well, the first sentence and paragraph not too bad, the second one's not too bad, but boy, that third one. But I've been thinking about it for quite a long period of time. I didn't know my speech because I was still working on it. Edward Everett basically did 2 hours from memory. I was too busy to spend lots of times doing the memorization there. I was told that instead of 2 hours, my speech was about 3 minutes. On the way back to Washington City from Gettysburg, I came down with a very bad headache and a fever, and I went to the executive mansion and was told that I had smallpox. Now, it wasn't a major amount of smallpox. It was just a virulent smallpox, but smallpox is smallpox. And I was sick for about 2 to 3 weeks, and I was quarantined also. Doctor said, don't let anybody in to see that man. Well, Well, if you've ever been in any type of business where you're in charge of something, everybody wants to come and see you. Everybody wants something from you. And finally, I had something I could give to everyone, and they wouldn't let me. So, on November 19th, 1863, this is what I said. "Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. Understand that something else is happening here. Are we going to open up the floor for questions later on? Do we know?
Oh, I'm up here. Let me get it.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you, sir.
It's funny, Mr. President, you brought up your age. You don't look a day over 200 to me. But we did have a birthday party for you in our fair city some time ago, and some of the children wrote some birthday cards for you. And we have one that might like to come up here and present you with some. Is Mackenzie here?
Yeah,
There she is. Do you have a speech, Mackenzie? Okay.
All right, very good.
We are sorry that you... Oh, I forget what I did.
You're sorry what?
I've done that too, so that's why I do my speeches.
Well, you had a birthday party, right? And you all wrote birthday cards for the president, and that's what you want to give him right now, right? Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Thank you for your kindness and for everyone else that wrote the cards too. I'm much obliged with that. Now, I want to know, when you had the birthday party, did you have cake with candles? Did you have 205 candles? Okay. Yeah, I've been to some places where they do that. You have to bring out the fire brigade and have them on call just in case. And fellas have some stuff called oxygen that they give me because I get kind of winded at that. But it was very nice of you all. snuck that one in there. You all did this one. I appreciate it.
Do you remember your speech now? You want to give your speech now?
We are sorry that you didn't make it to our party that we made for it, and we made some cards for you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Very nice.
Before the president takes remarks from the audience, I want to run through a few things here. For the president and Mrs. Lincoln, I have something from the museum for you. And a little token of our esteem and appreciation. And also we're going to make you guys life members of the American Civil War Museum of Ohio.
Very good. I'm pleased, and I believe in this museum. It's excellent, and thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. We also want to thank Joan Messer, who's playing the harp upstairs. Rouse for helping me pick out the line, because if it were up to me, you'd have Mad Dog 2020 in Boonesboro. Jamie Naiteki and the Airmark people from Heidelberg University provided the food. We have a very dedicated group of volunteers here at the museum, without which we wouldn't be able to function. So if you're a volunteer, just kind of raise your hand and wiggle, and so people can see you. And we have a group of board members also who put in some time, not as much as the volunteers certainly, but board members, please like to wait a little bit. We have several of those here today. Okay. Thank all of you, our sponsors, our guests, our in-kind donors. You've made this night a lot of fun, and we hope we can do this next year again. One thing I want to mention is it's an announcement that we haven't made public yet, but one of our board members, Rex Felton, if you ever know Rex, you know he's been a lifelong student of the Civil War. Well, he has amassed over the years a huge volume of literature, books, periodicals, over 4,000 volumes that we know of. And he's donated the entire library to the museum with a grant from local, they call them camps, of these Sons of Confederate Veterans, who's one of the members is his teacher, a history teacher out at Mohawk High School. They obtained a grant for us, and we now have ready to be dedicated and opened in a few weeks the Rex H. Felton Archival and Research Library. It's located on the 3rd floor, and if anybody wants to go up and see it, we're really proud of it. As I said, it's not open yet, but if you go up the back stairway, we'll have the room open for you so that you can see that, and you'll be very impressed. So, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to President Lincoln. Oh, and 85% of the collection is Confederate. Rex had a special interest in Confederate history, and there's some really cool things up there. So it's going to be research, so you can't take things out. But you can't get anything.
Interesting, Confederate history. Well, it just depends on who's writing the history as to what you end up having there. So Mr. Lincoln and I would like to have you, if you have any questions for either, well, I'm losing you here, for either one of us, please go ahead and ask. We'll answer it to the best of our abilities and mental acumen. Question, please. Yes, sir.
If you didn't write the speech on the 18th of November, when did you write it?
The question was, when did I write the Gettysburg Address? Like I said, I've been doing bits and pieces all along. There are some sections of it in the 1830s I've been thinking about. On July 4th, the day after the battle, the folks wanted me to come out and give us a speech, and I didn't have much of a speech to give, but I said, well, how long was it? Some 80 some odd years ago, and there, like I said, there was kind of bits and pieces. I was invited, the official signature and invitation was about 3 weeks before going to Gettysburg, but I believe I ended up having some folks saying, I think it would be nice having the president come for something like this too. So I would say I'm not a fast writer. I like to think and rethink and write and rewrite. I gave the Gettysburg Address, and then folks were asking for copies of it so they could auction them off to possibly buy medical supplies and things like that. And for each of the versions of the Gettysburg Address I wrote, I changed things. And for those of you that learned it one way, oh, there's another one way here. There's the country was upon versus the country was on, and then there's a couple of that's, and just quite a variety. And the last one, the Bliss copy, is the one that I gave, and I do like that one the best. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Lincoln, what future First Lady do you think most emulated you? Who would you be familiar with or similar to?
Well, I'll just give it to you right here.
I'm begging your pardon, I was just getting a little lightheaded there. I would say maybe Mrs. Roosevelt.
Because?
Because she went around and visited, I'm going to have to sit down, I beg your pardon, and visited people. She spoke out about injustices. Many people don't know that I visited the soldiers in the hospitals a lot. I helped my dressmaker, Mrs. Keckley, raise money for the Contraband Aid Society. And the contraband were the freed slaves that came to Washington. And I helped her raise money for that cause. And then, of course, the sanitary fairs. We all of us women worked with that.
Could you explain that?
The sanitary fairs were held to raise money for medical supplies, for food. Women engaged would get together in groups and tear cloth to make bandages for the soldiers. We encouraged women to make extra canned goods to send to the soldiers. So Eleanor Roosevelt, because her husband was in a wheelchair, of course, she did a lot of the traveling. Now, I didn't, in my day, women didn't go off by themselves. But I did speak up about things and got myself quite a reputation. One of my husband's secretaries liked to call me the Hellcat. They thought I didn't know. But you just speak up about injustice. That's just what you have to do.
Thank you.
Now, I'm a little confused here. I thought you were still the First Lady. But, okay, I'll tell you what. So I will take off my frock coat and I will be a Lincoln scholar and watch Mrs. Lincoln's reaction. It was subtle. It was very subtle. Yes, yes, dear.
That makes me have to stand up. Where we come from, when a man is in his shirt sleeves, it is considered that he is in his underwear. So this is quite an embarrassment for a lady to see her husband in this shape. And he has been known to answer the door in his shirt sleeves, and it's just not heard of.
Yeah, that reminds me of a time when there were some ladies coming to see Mrs. Lincoln, and we were both upstairs, and she was in the back getting ready, and the ladies knocked at the door, and I was was upstairs too, and I was like this, underwear or whatever, and I opened up the window and I yelled down to the ladies and said, "Come on in, Mrs. Lincoln's. She's in the back putting on her harness and her bridle. She'll be right down." Would you believe that those ladies passed that information on to her? So, yes, I do have to be careful and cautious when I would never roll up my sleeves. That's just going way beyond me. Other questions? Yes?
That's not true.
I was told the British ambassador was somewhat surprised when he heard that you blacked your own boots, but that you asked him in response whose boots he blacked.
Exactly. Yeah, done some work. Why, Mr. President, you shouldn't be out there splitting that wood for firewood. Well, whose wood should I be splitting? Exactly. Yeah, that's, you are correct on that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President, Mrs. Lincoln, thank you very much. We're honored to have you here this evening. I understand that you like to go to the theater. What's one of your favorite plays or operas?
Now, why is she laughing?
Ma'am, I have to answer for our president again. You know, people are always asking us about this. Mr. Lincoln frets so, and he works so hard. The theater is the only rest he gets, and I encourage him to go every chance he can. Maybe you can tell him about that actor man.
Before I went to Gettysburg, I think I'll just hold on here instead of working with it. Before I went to Gettysburg, about 2 or 3 weeks before I went to Gettysburg, I ended up going seeing a play at Grover's Theater. There's Grover's and there's Ford. And it was one of the Booth brothers. You have Edwin, and you have John, and then you have the other one. I knew I was going to run there somehow. But it was John Booth that was doing it, and it was a marble statue, and it wasn't a cerebral type of play. Oh, he was moving and jumping and things like that. I much prefer his brother, Edwin. He's a much better Shakespearean actor. And I did like going to the theater. I think maybe over 100 times. I went to the theater, and they're just down the street. So most of the time I had to get a carriage to go back and forth. But I do like Mr. Booth. I like him a lot. Yes, sir. In the back. Okay.
Did your mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, share with you much about her family?
The question was, did my mother, Nancy Hanks, share with me information about her family? Now, sir, I am a politician. I may have to work my way around here. I believe that, as my understanding, Nancy Hanks was born out of wedlock. And that Lincoln thought that he didn't know who the father was, but that father must have been one of those rich Virginia aristocrats, because just look how smart he came out to be. And if you look at my pa now, he's a Lincoln. He's kind of a short fellow and stocky now. He's smart for the time period, but we generally don't talk about that much. I have told some folks. I told my law partner Billy Herndon that, and Billy Herndon hauled off and wrote some of that information down, and the cat kind of gets out of the bag there. Yes, sir?
The reason I ask is one of the churches here in town has a bell that was forged by the Hanks forgery, or whatever the proper name is. And it dates back to the 1850s or 60s. and it happens to be St. Mary's Church. And supposedly, or at least when one of their former pastors, namely myself, was checking into that, they said that this Hanks family would be relatives or brothers of Nancy Hanks.
Yeah. Now, there's a whole slew of Hanks. Now, let me just tell you, there's Hanks here and there's Hanks there. There's two famous actors that are Hanks related. Tom Hanks is one of them. I was just checking to see if they lived down the bank. And I understand that George Clooney is also a Hanks relative. Now, I did invite them both to come tonight, and they got lost in the woods. You can kind of trace the Lincolns quite a ways back to Hingham, England, and you can follow what the Hanks, especially Nancy's group, they're hard to follow. I think they were just poor, and I think probably Nancy's mother was taken advantage of. But yeah, there are quite a few Hanks relatives. There are some Lincoln relatives that are around also, but they're not direct bloodline. They are related to Abraham Lincoln's father, Thomas. I'm with a group called the Association of Lincoln Presenters, and one of the Lincoln presenters is named Ralph Lincoln, and he's a real live Lincoln. Works his way back up to Mordecai Lincoln. But as far as, is there anybody alive that's still in the bloodline of Abraham Lincoln? The answer is no. The last one died, his name was Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. And he didn't have any children. He ended up getting married in his 60s to a woman from West Germany, and she became with child. But Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith had prostate problems and had a vasectomy at that time, and so it was not to be, and I believe she received $1 million and was sent back to West Germany a few years ago. The son, I think, is still alive in the United States. I think he is an attorney in Tampa Bay. But no direct lines to Lincoln, which is very unfortunate. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, when you were a young boy growing up in Indiana, I understand that you self-taught yourself how to read. How old were you when you did that, and how were you able to accomplish that?
The question was, how did I teach myself to read? Actually, I kind of started in Kentucky. Anybody that had a book, anyone that could help me out was greatly appreciated. My folks didn't read very well. My father, he was an excellent carpenter, but when it comes to reading, he did not necessarily know how to read or write. I got books that I read when I was young. One was the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, Pilgrim's Progress, and just slow and steady. My pa got mad with me many times because I would always carry a book with me, and I'd go around somewhere and I'd be reading something. For example, I was plowing a field and reading a book at the same time. Let me tell you, that does not make for a straight line. So what's going on there? Going over this way. And my father did have the opportunity to tell me, I don't believe you were plowing a straight row there. I did go to schools that they call lab schools. In lab school, everybody talks at the same time. Yeah, you got the big kids, you got the little kids. It's a one-room schoolhouse, and everybody talks at the same time. If you weren't talking, you're going to be misbehaving, and the teacher would possibly get a switch and chase you down and things like that. So I absorbed as much as I could. I was a reading fool or a fool reading, one of the two there. Thank you. Yes, sir.
When we were about 203, there was a movie that came out about you.
Why, yes.
Wondering how you felt.
I thought the movie Lincoln was very well done. I had a chance to see it in Gettysburg with 300 other Lincoln aficionados. There was a thing called the Lincoln Forum, and 5 of the folks that were helping as consultants in the movie were there in the theater when the movie was done. Stand up on the stage, we have some questions for you. Why this, why that? Well done, and the problem is he had to take so much information. If you've ever read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, there's an awful lot of material in there, and he basically worked it down to, a page and a half, but bits and pieces of other things there. Lincoln talks about, in the first scene with Mary, he says, well, how's your coconut? And that's referring back to the carriage accident. But if you don't know that, that's very strange. He says, calls her Molly, and I thought her name was Mary. Well, that was a common name that he, or kind of a love name that he had given to her at that time. Now, Mrs. Lincoln didn't like the movie. Didn't like it. She said that Mary didn't have a big enough part. You needed to have more of that. I'd like to see the parts that were cut out. Then this last year, the screenwriter for the movie came to Gettysburg and gave a speech and ended up having his public opinion bath, kind of like me with you, telling me things, and I'm telling you things. And someone got up and said, why did you include so many cuss words? And you just kind of stammered there. And it wasn't necessary. It's a 2.5-hour movie, and I think it's not necessary, but it's Hollywood. You got to stir the pot somewhere. I think what he could have done is just take things from Clark Gable. He could have used the word, I don't give a doggone or something there. So, yeah. I think it's very well, it's the best of the ones that have ever been made. So, thank you. It's a good question. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
President, I understand that you used to work on the riverboats when you were younger, and you have a patent. Can you explain the patent?
Well, the question was being a riverboat pilot. Oh, you bet. Now, I was no Mark Twain, but I actually helped to build a riverboat. It was maybe about half the size of the room here to back there, maybe from that brick section over here. It was kind of flat. It's called a flatboat. And you have somebody in the back steering, if I can say the word. And I was the captain of the boat. It's myself and another feller. When I was steering, I was the captain, and then when he took the turn of steering, he was the captain. So we went down the Mississippi twice, all the way from Illinois, and you can only go down. You can't turn around and come back. So we sold the wood and everything that you had there, and then we had to make our way back. I always like inventions. It just interests me to no end, and sometimes Mrs. Lincoln doesn't appreciate it because I come home and I've crawled underneath some piece of equipment and I'm all greased up and torn and what have you. But I noticed a boat that had kind of gotten stuck on a sandbar, which is a bar that's made out of sand in the river. And I thought, well, gee, either you have to dig yourself out, you have to pour yourself out. So maybe if you put kind of balloons or some sort of inflatable things on the side, that might lift the boat up and make it way out. I did have a patent. It was 6,494, something like that. And so I'm the only president that did not have a patent. Now, of course, if Mr. Jefferson was around, I'd been in the hundreds of thousands in my patent because he was so smart. I built some models of it, but it never went anywhere. Though I had been told by some folks that had been doing things with submarines that was maybe kind of similar to the ballast and racing submarines, but yeah, didn't make a whole lot of money with that. So. Other question, please. In my previous life, I've been a teacher, so I know there's the 5-second rule. You sit and wait for 5 seconds, somebody's going to do a guilty, or they have to go to the bathroom. No, you don't have to raise your hand if you have to go. Yes.
What were some of your greatest childhood memories?
Well, as a kid, my pa was the kind of fellow that wanted to live in the wilderness. And we were in the wilderness. We had mountain lions, we had bobcats, we had wolves, we had bears. Our log cabins had little strips that you fill with mud at certain times. And during the summer, you had a tendency to clear those out and let the air back and forth. And you look out at night, and there's some eye looking back at you, and it's not friendly. It was a dangerous area, but it was a fun area to be into. I played when I could. The world was my playground until I got to be about 9. Actually, before that, because when you live in the wilderness, you got to clear the area out. You have to farm, you got to drink water and things like that. But kind of going back to reading, I was always tall for my age. I was going to say I'm always tall for my height, but that doesn't work. That's a bad phrase here. I like to run, I like to jump. I'm a pretty good wrestler. My arms are extremely long, my legs are long, and I'm just kind of, I could get a hold of folks and use physics to move them around a little bit there. Yeah, so, yeah, yes?
Did you think Bill O'Reilly's little killing candidate, the fact that kind of like it?
Well, when Bill O'Reilly initially came out with that, I figured, okay, it was killing Lincoln. I thought, was probably doing killing Kennedy. Then he was going to be killing Christ here soon, and I'll be darned, he took my word on that. Going to run out of people, maybe have to go for Gandhi or something. If it makes people interested in the Civil War and history, I think that was very, very good. Yeah, he went for an easier to read version, but it was kind of a page turner. The last book that was out on, that was a popular book on Lincoln's assassination was The Night Lincoln Was Shot by Jim Bishop, but that was way back when. Okay, I think we're winding down, but I have questions for you. And you thought you were going to get out of here easy. Let's see. Questions. Okay. I might have done this last year, so if you were here last year, don't listen. What was the name that I did not like being called? Now, I was called ugly, I was called stupid, I was called orangutan, a baboon, a gorilla, and that was General McClellan. He kind of liked to call me by a primate's name there. Name I did not like being called. It is. Abe. I did not like being called Abe. Folks that were my friends, folks that knew me, called me Abraham or Mr. Lincoln. My wife Mary, she called me Mr. Lincoln when we were dating. And after we had children, she called me father. And I called her Molly initially, and then Mary, and then mother. Now, she's also called me some other things, but we do not mention that out in public. So, we'll leave that by. It's very interesting. Honest Abe and Uncle Abe and Father Abe and things like that, it was so easy. And Lincoln was the rail splitter. He hated splitting rails. That's hard work. My pa taught me how to do hard manual labor, but he didn't teach me how to love it. So, yeah, if it gets you elected, that would be good. But, yeah. And let's see, there was another one, a document that Lincoln did not have produced at the time of his demise. Abraham Lincoln did not have a will. Abraham Lincoln in the 1830s was making wills out for folks in Illinois when he shouldn't have even been making wills because he wasn't a lawyer at that time. But he did not have a will, and Mary did not appreciate that. You ended up having a lot of things. things going there. Let's see. Well, gosh, I'm running out of questions here. Actually, I have a question that if you can answer that would be fine. How many of you are veterans or spouses of veterans or sons or daughters of veterans, folks that have fought? Do you raise your hand, please? Very good. There are times when we have to go to war, but war is not pleasant. Oftentimes it's very boring, and then there's other times it's terrifying. So on behalf of Abraham Lincoln and myself, I thank you and your family members for serving our country. Okay, then child question. Go, you older folks can answer this too. Abraham Lincoln's favorite food. Abraham Lincoln's favorite. I did like apples, I like popcorn, and stuff like that. Okay, you youngest get a chance to answer favorite food. You'll never get it, so no. Pizza, oh, that's always a good one. We did have some Italians that were coming to fight for us. They're a Balkans group, and they didn't have pizza. Spaghetti instead. Pork, well, you are getting very close. You're about as close as anybody is. Bacon. Now wait a minute, you're not the young ones though. Bacon. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Me, I apologize. Abraham Lincoln's favorite food is ham because his name was Abraham. Please keep your shoes on. I was only kidding there. So. Any other questions? We'll be glad to answer them for you. Oh, yes, sir.
Could you comment on your relationship with Grant? Did you get along pretty well?
A lot of generals that I had, I didn't get along with very well. Like I said, I was kind of had a hook and was pulling the generals away. They would fight one battle and then retreat and start back up later on. General Grant was just different. He was from Ohio, down around the Ohio River, and he was just a short little fellow. And he didn't speak much, but he kind of had that determination that if he wanted to, he could run through the wall here. And when he would fight, he would continue to fight. And he would fight the enemy, not say, oh, let's go to Richmond. Early in the war, that was the whole thing. It's on to Richmond, forward to Richmond, on to Richmond. Well, if the army's there to protect them, yeah, you fight the army, but Grant is basically, let's go and let's fight the armies that are out there. So I liked it because I didn't have to be in charge. For the most part, there were some generals that I kind of had to tell them what to do or suggest what I wanted to do or order them what I wanted them to do. I ordered General McClellan to start moving his troops in 1862 on Washington's birthday, February the 22nd. And he was a stationary engine. He didn't move. And, so Grant, he and Grant got along very well. But Grant was smart enough to not stay in Washington City, Washington, D.C. Because if you're in Washington, D.C. and Washington City, you're always going to have somebody telling you what you should do. I think you need to do this. I think you need to do that. And with Grant being out in the field, it made quite a difference. It's in here in the state of Ohio as far as the generals that made a difference and won the war. You have General Grant. You have General Sherman, who went down south and made Georgia howl. And you said, oh, he's so mean to those folks. Well, he actually wasn't. It was a different type of warfare, but he wasn't, after he captured Atlanta, he wasn't fighting that much. So he was actually saving lives instead of, well, let's go and have a battle and we're going to be losing folks on both sides. General Sheridan, just a little fella, but he's from Ohio also, and he was with the cavalry. You had General Rosecrans, which, how many of you ever heard of General Rosecrans? Well, that doesn't count if you're into history. That doesn't count. Anyway, he was from the Delaware area. His brother was Bishop Rosecrans and helped Rosecrans actually helped to build the cathedral down there on Broad Street, I think. He was a good general. I think 5 out of the 6 battles that he was in charge, he did a good job. And then at Chickamauga, he didn't do a good job. And here comes Abraham Lincoln and pulled him away and actually brought in General Grant. So. And then we also had General Custer. Now, you have been thinking too many bad things about General Custer. He was crazy.
Which General Custer are you referring to?
Pardon?
Which General Custer?
You are correct. Which one would you like to hear?
How about Thomas?
Thomas Custer was General George Armstrong Custer's younger brother. He won 2 Congressional Medals of Honor. Very good. What ended up happening with General Custer at the Battle of Gettysburg, you've all heard about Pickett's charge. It's actually Pickett, Pettigrew, and Trimble. Pickett gets all the credit for all the blame. But they were supposed to go across this way, and then you're supposed to have... Let me borrow your cane. Here's the Battle of Gettysburg right here. You've got Pickett's charge coming this way. You end up having attacks here at Culp's Hill, and then Jeb Stuart. I can yell. That's okay. And then you've got Jeb Stuart sneaking in the back. It was a typical Napoleon move. You pester people here, and then you kick them in the rear end on the backside. And General Custer, I think there was maybe 5,000 Confederate cavalry to maybe 2,000 Union. And General Custer, basically, pardon?
Custer only had 4 regiments.
Yeah, they were.
It was only about 1,600 men.
Yeah, the Michigan, come on, you Wolverines, thank you. Yeah, so he's even nuttier than I thought he was. But everything was supposed to be right on time. Battle here, come up behind. We split through, you split the Union forces, and it's on to Washington. Thank you. But, yeah, he was something else. Now, there are other generals that you didn't want to be with. General Kilpatrick, Kilpatrick? Was she Kilkenny? No. Anyway, Kilpatrick, yes, he would lose a lot of his men. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for supporting the museum. I think it's excellent, and whenever I have the opportunity to tell folks about it, I do. It's a good place to come and take a look, and a good place to support. If you'd like to have pictures with Mrs. Lincoln and myself, that would be fine, but we're not going to smile. Because in the old days, it takes so long to take the pictures. Now, when you hand an iPhone to some of us older folks, now what button do I push? Thank you, dear.
Rex H. fell in the library upstairs. Let's give Rex a hand for all these. No one leaves till the wine's gone. And stop eating the food, because we get to take the leftovers home.
Taught us something about,